don't you think men really like intelligence more when it comes right down to it?
Please, are we going to go back to that? Are you kidding?
Sure, I mean, a brain, a caring...
For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the king of late night, a master of cool who seemed utterly unflappable. He was a comforting presence in American living rooms, the man who put the nation to bed with a wry smile and a perfect punchline. But what happened when the king's composure finally shattered? What happened when the easygoing facade cracked under the pressure of live TV, backstage power plays, and deeply personal wounds? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the most intense, uncomfortable, and shocking arguments of Johnny Carson's career. These are the moments that revealed a side of the late-night legend you were never meant to see. From on-air fights that blurred the line between comedy and rage, to behind-the-scenes showdowns that nearly turned violent, these stories show us a man who fiercely protected his show, his reputation, and his boundaries. These are the moments that prove even a king has a breaking point. To get the world of Johnny Carson, you first have to understand his relationship with Don Rickles. Rickles, the legendary insult comic, was one of Carson's favorite guests and closest friends. Their dynamic was built on mutual respect and merciless on-air mockery. But in 1976, their playground became a battleground all because of a simple wooden cigarette box. This wasn't just any prop. The box had sat on Carson's desk for 9 years, a fixture he'd brought with him from New York. It was as much a part of the set as Johnny's mug or Ed McMahon's booming laugh. One night, with Bob Newhart guest hosting, Don Rickles was his usual tornado of chaos. In a moment of mock rage, he picked up the prized cigarette box and slammed it down, cracking the wood. The studio audience howled. Back in his office, Carson wasn't laughing. The next day, Johnny returned to his desk. As he settled in, he reached for his familiar prop, and it fell apart in his hands. "What the hell happened to this?" Carson asked, his voice a mix of real surprise and simmering anger. The crew and bandleader Doc Severinsen quickly gave up the culprit, Rickles. What happened next was pure, unscripted TV gold. For Carson, this was a breach of respect. He learned that Rickles was, at that very moment, taping his sitcom, Sharky*, in the studio right across the hall. A plan began to form, one born of both fury and a brilliant sense of television. With a camera crew in tow, Carson, holding the shattered box, stormed out of his own studio. He burst onto the CPO Sharky set right in the middle of a scene. "Stop the taping," Carson bellowed. The actors froze. The audience gasped. Then erupted. There was Johnny Carson, the coolest man in America, looking genuinely furious, confronting a sheepish Don Rickles in his full naval uniform. "Somebody broke my cigarette box," Carson announced, holding up the pieces like a prosecutor. "They told me you broke it on the show last night." For once in his life, Rickles was speechless. He stammered, doubling over in a mix of laughter and pure terror. "Well, he managed, before Carson cut him off. "You big dummy," Johnny shot back. The confrontation was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Carson was genuinely angry about the box, but he was also a showman who knew this was historic. He was playing the part of the enraged host, but the anger was real. He had built an empire on order, and Rickles had brought his chaos a little too close to the throne. The line between a friendly ribbing and a real confrontation had never been so beautifully, or hilariously, blurred. While their friendship endured, the message behind the scenes was clear. There were lines you just didn't cross with Carson. It wasn't really about the box, it was about respect. The jester had touched the crown. 2 years later, Rickles guessed, again, nervously handled the repaired box with mock reverence before joking, "When he dies, I'm going to put him in this." It was the perfect, hilarious end to a clash that showed just how seriously Johnny Carson took his job, even when he was laughing. While the Rickles incident was a public spectacle, Johnny Carson's feud with Las Vegas entertainer Wayne Newton was a much more serious, personal, and dangerous battle. This one played out mostly behind the scenes and threatened to end in actual physical violence. For years, Mr. Las Vegas Wayne Newton was a frequent and friendly guest on The Tonight Show. But their relationship soured dramatically, spiraling into one of show business's most bitter feuds. It all started with professional jealousy and the power of Carson's nightly monologue. The spark was a business deal. In 1980, both Carson and Newton were trying to buy the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. When Newton's group won, Carson, a man who hated to lose, was reportedly furious. That fury found an outlet on his show. Suddenly, Wayne Newton became a recurring punchline. Johnny relentlessly mocked Newton's flamboyant image and high-pitched voice, often framing him as lacking masculinity. The jokes were sharp, personal, and they hit hard. Newton, who had considered Carson a friend, was deeply hurt. He felt it was a targeted campaign, and he spent over a year trying to call Carson to ask him to stop. But his calls were never put through. The situation escalated when Newton became convinced Carson was fueling rumors linking him to organized crime accusations that could destroy his casino career. This led to a series of NBC News reports investigating Newton, which prompted him to sue the network for libel, believing Carson was the source of it all. Fed up, Newton decided if he couldn't get Carson on the phone, he'd confront him in person. In a move few would ever dare, he walked into the NBC studios, found out which office Carson was in, and told the producer to leave the room. What followed was a tense, face-to-face showdown. According to Newton, he told Carson, in no uncertain terms, that the jokes had to stop and threatened to straighten it out physically if they continued. Carson, a man used to being the most powerful person in any room, was reportedly stunned. He tried to de-escalate, claiming to be Newton's biggest fan, but Newton wasn't having it. Guests didn't threaten the host. No one intimidated Johnny Carson on his home turf. The result was immediate and absolute. The jokes about Wayne Newton stopped, but so did their relationship. Newton was banned from The Tonight Show. The feud had drawn a permanent line in the sand. Newton later won his initial libel lawsuit against NBC, though it was overturned on appeal. The friendship with Carson was shattered forever, a casualty of a war that started with jokes but escalated into a deeply personal conflict over respect, reputation, and power. Of all the conflicts in Johnny Carson's 30-year reign, none was as infamous or as heartbreaking as his feud with Joan Rivers. This wasn't a single argument but a Cold War that started with a perceived betrayal and ended with nearly 3 decades of bitter silence. Joan Rivers owed her career to Johnny Carson. After her first Tonight Show appearance in 1965, he told her on air, "God, you're funny, you're gonna be a star." He didn't just give her a platform, he gave her validation. Over the next 2 decades, she became a Tonight Show institution, eventually becoming his permanent guest host. He was her mentor, her champion, and her friend. In the eyes of many, she was the heir apparent. But in 1986, the new Fox network night show, airing directly opposite The Tonight Show. The problem was how Carson found out. By most accounts, he heard the news from the media, not from Joan herself. To him, their relationship demanded a personal phone call. Except he felt blindsided and betrayed. Rivers' side is more complex. She claimed NBC and Carson's team never offered her a clear path forward. When the historic Fox offer came, she felt she had to take it. She later said she did try to call Johnny before the news broke, but he refused her call. When she finally got him on the phone after the news was public, he was icy, hung up on her, and then never spoke to her again for the rest of his life. The fallout was swift and brutal. Rivers was permanently banned from The Tonight Show, but Carson's influence went even further. An unofficial blacklist emerged. Guests who appeared on Joan's show might not be welcome on his 1980s Hollywood. A ban from Carson could be a career death sentence, and many major stars stayed away from her new show. Rivers' show on Fox failed. That failure was compounded by the tragic suicide of her husband and producer, Edgar Rosenberg. Through it all, Carson remained silent. The ban was so powerful that it was upheld even after Carson retired in 1992, with his successor, Jay Leno, continuing the policy. For 26 years, Joan Rivers was in exile from the very stage that had made her a star. She didn't return to The Tonight Show until 2014, when Jimmy Fallon invited her for a brief, emotional cameo. Tragically, she passed away just a few months later. The feud revealed a core part of Carson's character. Loyalty was his currency. He felt Joan had tried to stage a coup, and in his kingdom, that was an unforgivable sin. It was a story of ambition, miscommunication, and immense pride. But in the end, it was Carson who had the power to enforce a silence that lasted a generation. While Johnny's professional feuds were legendary, his most intense conflicts happened far from the cameras, within his own famously private world. Carson built a fortress around his personal life, but behind it were strained relationships and profound regret, particularly with his 3 sons, Chris, Rick, and Corey. The pressure of being Johnny Carson's son was immense. He was an institution, a man married to his work. This emotional distance was especially tragic in his relationship with his middle son, Rick. Rick was a talented photographer, but struggled with his mental health. According to some reports, when Rick was sent to a military psychiatric ward, Johnny, terrified of a media scandal, did not visit him. For Rick, this was a devastating rejection. The family tensions sometimes exploded into view. At The Tonight Show's 25th anniversary party in 1987, both Johnny and Rick had been drinking. When Johnny saw his son intoxicated, he reportedly flew into a rage. The two began screaming at each other in front of friends and colleagues, and had to be physically separated. It was a raw, ugly glimpse into the private pain that Carson worked so hard to conceal. Tragically, Rick died in a car accident in 1991 at the age of 39. The loss shattered Johnny. Those close to him said he was haunted by the regret of not being a more present father for the rest of his life. 3 weeks after Rick's death, Carson returned to The Tonight Show and did something he almost never did. He spoke about his private life. In a moving tribute, he showed a montage of his son's photography. For perhaps the first time, the audience saw the immense weight of the crown he wore. The most intense arguments of Johnny Carson's life weren't with celebrities, but with himself and his family, over a legacy that brought incredible success and unimaginable sorrow. Beyond the high-profile feuds, Carson's reign was also defined by quieter, but no less definitive, bannings. His stage was the most valuable real estate in show business, and he guarded it with an iron will. He had an unwritten code of conduct, and if you violated it, the phone just stopped ringing. Take Dana Carvey. His brilliant impression of Carson on Saturday Night Live was initially flattering to Johnny, but one sketch crossed a line. It depicted Carson as out of touch and senile. According to Carvey, that was it. The sketch had hit a nerve about aging and relevance, and the invitations to be a guest on The Tonight Show simply stopped coming. The joke was too close to home. Impressionist Rich Little found himself in a similar situation. He was a frequent guest for years, famous for his spot-on impersonation of Carson, but Little later said he believed he was blacklisted simply because Carson grew tired of being mocked so well and so often. By 1982, he was no longer welcome. Even perceived arrogance could get you exiled. The actor Charles Grodin was known for his awkward, contrarian humor, but during one appearance, he made a playful jab about Carson's private financial affairs. For Johnny, who guarded his privacy fiercely, this was a major breach. There was no on-air fight, but Grodin's invitations to the show ceased. The door was quietly shut. These incidents paint a picture of a man in complete command of his universe. The Tonight Show ran on his rules, wit, charm, and above all, respect. He wasn't afraid of a loud confrontation, but more often, his power was shown with a decisive silence. Crossing Johnny Carson didn't always lead to an argument. Sometimes, it just led to you disappearing from the guest list. And for a generation of performers, that was a much scarier outcome. The world of classic television is filled with incredible stories like these. If you're fascinated by the hidden histories of Hollywood, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We're always digging into the archives to bring you more tales you thought you knew. And let us know in the comments, which of these Johnny Carson arguments surprised you the most? Do you remember watching any of these moments as they happened? We'd love to hear your memories. Johnny Carson was a symbol of cool composure in an ever-changing world. But the moments of intense conflicted arguments and feuds that marked his career reveal a far more complex man. They show us someone who was not just an entertainer, but a fierce protector of his empire. The clash with Don Rickles was a masterclass in anger and showmanship. The war with Wayne Newton showed a man whose jokes carried real-world power. The heartbreaking schism with Joan Rivers revealed a deep demand for loyalty and a grudge that was as vast as his influence. And the private turmoil with his family exposed the profound personal cost of his success. These arguments were more than just flashes of temper. They were glimpses behind the curtain. They show us the immense pressure of being Johnny Carson. We'll always remember the laughter and the charm, but these intense confrontations are just as much a part of his legacy. They remind us that behind the coolest persona in television history was a man of deep conviction, formidable power, and fiery passion, a side of Johnny we were rarely meant to see, but one we will never